Note: the following is based on testimony provided over a series of interviews and written correspondence, edited and cut together in an attempt to create a cohesive timeline of the events as described. It was 1968, if I remember correctly, and somewhere around the Cambodian border. We were getting the lay of the land on an LRRP, tracking supply routes into South Vietnam along Cambodia and mapping them out for future raids, and for the B-52 bombing campaign the following year that smashed the whole place to hell. The object sort of appeared overhead all of a sudden, a bright red-orange glow, and it looked like it was sort of melting. I don't know why, only some of us looked up in time, and we only got a brief glimpse through the tree cover. It was over our heads and then gone in a flash. I couldn't tell you how high it was or how fast it was moving, but maybe 4-5 seconds later there was a loud crash, and then a dull thump that you could feel through the ground. That let us know that it had fallen somewhere nearby. We figured it was a US plane, though for the life of me I couldn't tell you what the original shape of it was when it plummeted overhead. It was just too fast. All I remembered was the orange glow and thinking of molten metal. I even ducked, expecting some of it to fall on me. We were close enough to the northern border that we knew better than to use our long-range radios openly. The Soviets had sent their own Special Forces advisors armed with pretty good electronic snooping gear, and if they were nearby, they could pinpoint your location pretty accurately. We were now on a rescue mission, as far as everyone was concerned, and figured we'd hold off on the radios until we got to the crash site and asked for extraction. Turns out the damn thing was further than we thought, good 3 to 4 miles through awful terrain. When we got there, though, it was immediately obvious this was not a US plane, or at least nothing like any of us ever knew about. Our captain, obviously we're going to withhold names, had been in the black world for a while and knew there was some stuff flying over Vietnam made in the US that the public still didn't know about, but nothing like this. It reminded me of a giant metal egg that had just cracked wide open when it crashed. The entire scene was incredibly warm, and at first I thought this was just some crashed space capsule, maybe Soviet, since we were in their neck of the woods, but it was a dull gray and it looked like it had been made from a single piece of metal. There were no seams or bolts or screws. I've seen the way 3D printers work nowadays, and it looked like they'd been made that same way. I never got a good look in the inside, so I couldn't tell you much about it. The brush around it was on fire, and it was hard to see inside through the broken side of the craft. I couldn't tell you if there were any occupants. I didn't see any myself. We called in the crash and reported ourselves on scene, but were surprised to learn that there were already some birds en route. We got told to secure the site, so we did just that while hoping the whole damn jungle wouldn't go up in flames. The first aircraft overhead was a pair of F-4s, which quickly settled into an orbit. That's what kinda tipped us off that this was something real serious. I know this sounds silly now, but at the time we honestly didn't know what this damn thing was. The fire around it made it so hard to actually see the thing. Most of us still just thought it was either NASA or something Soviet. Anyway, I think the Air Force guys were overhead to ward off any curious Vietnamese MiGs. The first choppers to arrive were Hueys full of infantry, but the infantry wasn't let anywhere near the craft. They were deployed in a wide swath around it. I don't know what they told those boys, but it took a good 2 days to get that damn thing out of the jungle. And obviously, there was a need to secure the site given how close it was to the border. We got choppered back pretty immediately though. Other SOF guys came in and they worked a little closer to the actual craft along with some Air Force and Navy eggheads. I found out later they were all already read into the program. And that's what everyone called it, the program. And there were several rapid reaction units stationed throughout in theater. See, we learned from the Korean War that these things are attracted to conflict, and I guess that it makes sense. It's probably one of the most interesting things we do. A lot of people think this whole mess started in World War II, and maybe it did, but the program got put together during the Korean War, and that's when it was official. Anyway, I think the intel guys that read us in kinda jumped the gun a little. See, most of us were still of the opinion that this was just some space probe or something. They could have told us that and just let us go, and we'd lived the rest of our lives without a second thought. But I guess they thought we'd seen more than we did, so we got read in, kind of by force. As in, we had no choice. It was that or a dishonorable discharge, and I saw it happen once or twice. They fabricated an entire Article 15 or worse if they thought you'd be trouble. Everything to kill your credibility. Their favorite was drug charges. We all knew drugs were everywhere out there, so who was gonna listen to some washout kicked out for heroin? Back then, the world was a lot smaller than it is today. The last thing you wanted was for your community and your family to believe you got kicked out or washed out with a bad conduct discharge. So they read us in, only a little. People think you just get all the info at once. That's not how secret programs stay secret. We were only told what we needed to know. I didn't even realize those damn things were from space until I actually saw a body. And then it was sort of like, okay, yeah, you figured that out, here's a bit more info. For all I know, I never did learn the whole truth. But I do know a lot of it, and I'm kind of tired of sitting on it all these years. Plus, what are they going to do now to an old man? That's the thing. If they did anything to me or that Grush guy, well, it just sort of validate his story, right? Better leave us alone and let the world just think we're crazy. Speaking of Grush, I like him. He's confident, he's strict on following procedure. That's what makes him so frustrating. Everyone wants him to come out and say everything, but he's doing it right, only saying what he can outside of a classified briefing. I think he's a patriot. If he just wanted fame, he'd come out and say everything. Again, if they put him in jail for it, well, that's kind of admitting that he really did share some classified info, isn't it? Is he telling the truth, though? I don't know. A lot of what I've heard him say sounds right, but I've been out of it for 20 years now, and things change. And who knows what the whole truth is anyway. So, do I think he's lying or telling the truth? I think he's telling more truth than not, especially that part about aerospace contractors being involved. I know that's true. But I also don't ever underestimate how far these groups will go to create disinformation. And it's not just about deceiving the American public. Let me tell you, I spent about 30 years with the program, and the group is full of true blue-blooded patriots. You sort of had to be handling the most dangerous technology in the world. Imagine if we had another Manhattan Project and somebody ran off with a piece of that tech to the Soviets. Nobody liked lying to the public. But the thing people forget is we're not the only ones aware or at least suspecting that something is going on. The Soviets, well, the Russians now, the Chinese, hell, the Israelis too. Everyone's looking for any scrap of information they can get. Disinformation is real, but it's not directed at the American public. Well, mostly not. The fact is, I can tell you right now, the government does not want you thinking about UFOs. It makes recovery hard. It makes keeping it all a secret even harder. I don't think anyone was ever scared of mass panic or anything like that. Maybe now they are, I don't know. But not back then. It's all about keeping material out of the hands of the adversaries. Anyway, so after I got read in, you'd think there was some sort of special club you joined or something. Not really. Not for at least a year after that first crash, at least. We got put back on regular duty, only our unit got broken up. And that's bad. You don't do that to a team. But it happened. Also, I know for a fact we got put into the worst messes they could cook up. I know 5 of the original 12 died in combat, 3 more badly wounded. I think they were trying to kill us off. But about a year after that first crash, that's when I got brought in officially. As in, now my primary job was doing this stuff. Well, when it happened, it didn't happen often, but these things did fall out of the sky, or people would see something land or witness beings happening more often than people know. And we'd swoop in as fast as we could in case there was anything to snatch up. I think we pulled 3 total craft out of theater, and not just Vietnam. Damn near started a war with China in one recovery, but thank God their early warning systems were primitive back then, and it was close to the border. I don't think we could do that today. Europe was another hot spot, but most people don't know that. I'm not sure if anything ever crashed into the ocean. If it did, we definitely couldn't pull it out, I don't think. But Europe was always sort of ready for war at any moment. You had bombers with live nukes on constant patrol, electronic intelligence aircraft, military exercises all the time. All this on both sides of the border. A lot of activity. So they're probably curious. I think they did a better job keeping things quiet in Europe than in the US. But I think our media was a bit freer at the time, so you'd get UFO reports in major newspapers within a day of an event. Also, the Europeans kinda turned their nose up at the whole UFO thing. A lot more Americans were believers than Europeans, which made it easier to keep it a secret. The crafts themselves were extraordinary. That's the only way to describe them. I wasn't there for every single recovery, obviously, but they kept collections of them in different places and I got to see 2 of the collections. Everyone always looks at Wright-Patterson and the Foreign Technologies Division. How stupid do you think we are? That'd be the dumbest place to take this stuff because it'd be the first place Soviet spies would come looking. They wanted to know what we knew about them already. I can tell you what though, we faked some stuff going into Wright-Patterson, enough to stir up rumors because that's where we wanted the Soviets looking. It was fun, it was like a big game, and you had to play right into it. So a few enlisted guys spotted something strange and then they just let the rumor mill do its work. The real stuff didn't go to Wright-Patterson. There were a few government sites, sorry I don't want to tell you where because a lot of important work is still being done there, But there were these co-op sites run by the government and the big defense contractors, people like Raytheon, Boeing, everyone knows their names, but also people like Texas Instruments. It was a whole umbrella, but the little guys only got a tiny piece of the puzzle. Some guys from TI would get a piece of something and then be asked to figure out how it works, never being told where it came from. And on its own, I'm sure these eggheads had their suspicions, but it's hard to tell if something's actually alien. Alright, so that Grush guy is right about defense contractors being involved. You can't get their records, they're private companies, but you better believe that they don't pull the strings. Boeing's CEO isn't going to tell the US military he'll take the saucer out that they gave him for a joyride. But there are legal considerations, if this stuff becomes public and they reverse engineer it. Who owns the tech? Who gets to profit? Boeing or the US taxpayers who donated the stuff to keep it out of sight? I think a lot of people are thinking about that right now. The spacecraft themselves, and I'm only guessing they're spacecraft by the way, at least I know that they can go to space because we track them coming in and out all the time. But I don't think a lot of people are convinced that that's where they're really coming from. Instead, I think that's where they want us to think they're coming from. Anyway, so there are different shapes. The UFO people on the internet have done a pretty good job compiling the data on their own. I saw a chart someone made one time of the most commonly reported objects, and it's pretty accurate. So you got your flying eggs, your Tic Tacs, I guess you now call them, we just call them pills, your old-fashioned saucers, bells, triangles, whole mess of shapes. But the ones that crash are almost always the eggs and the bells. And they're smaller too. I think they're the drones that are remotely operated. And when they crash, you have to get really lucky because they have a habit of just disintegrating. Maybe it's a self-destruct mechanism, I don't know. The saucers, they were the crown jewels. I heard of several crashes, but I was only ever on a recovery of 2 saucers. I don't know what they're made of, but these things are tough. Once we recovered one in South America. I won't say where, because last I heard stuff was still ongoing there, and it wouldn't be very popular with the citizens if they found out their government was secretly collaborating with the US. Anyway, the saucer we recovered had hit the side of a rocky outcropping on its way down. It smashed the rock to pieces, then took out a 1/4 mile of trees. If it had happened on the outskirts of civilization, the whole UFO mystery would have been public knowledge by now. That's how much destruction that thing caused. But the craft itself was relatively unharmed. Later, once I was more senior and I moved into the administrative side of things, I learned the craft was either formed out of a single piece of material or put together at the atomic level. Incredibly strong stuff, however they do it. And like I said, not a single seam is visible. Even the entrance is invisible until it actually opens. That's how tight the tolerances are. By the way, that one took us a while to open. It took us a long time to figure out how to actually open these things without resorting to destructive means. And that's the good news. We could cut or melt or blast our way in if we wanted to, so these things can be destroyed. It means we have a fighting chance if they ever turn bad on us. Though, I don't think it'd matter. They'd probably just drop some rocks on our heads and wait for the ice age to end. We're like schoolyard kids armed with pebbles against these things. We can cut them open and we can shoot them down occasionally. It took a while to pull that thing out of the jungle and get it on a ship back to the States. By the time we opened it, well, have you ever opened a fridge full of food after the power's been out for a few days? The discs are manned. I don't know if these things died on impact or after, but there was nothing alive when we cracked it open. I guess everyone wants to know about these things. I call them things on purpose, not out of disrespect or anything like that. I just don't think any of us were ever convinced they were actually living creatures. Well, not in the sense that you and I are. For one, they don't have much of a digestive system, just enough to process the food they get from the ship itself. Kind of like an IV. There is no actual stomach to hold large amounts of food like normal animals. So that kind of made us suspicious that these weren't really what was behind this whole thing. I don't know how many live ones were ever found, but I know that we found 2 alive in one crash. Well, it was less a crash and more of a hard landing. What I mean is this thing was intact with barely any damage and had clearly avoided smashing into the surrounding countryside. But witnesses said there'd been a big flash of light and a loud sound over the mountains. This was in the UK. People had reported seeing something fiery go across the sky all across the UK, but it turns out it was an honest-to-God coincidence. A big meteor had hit a nearby area at the same time that this thing came down. Obviously, the British were in on it along with us and a few other major NATO partners, so we concentrated on getting these things before the Soviets. It was a default agreement that all recovered materials went back to the US, which made the Europeans a bit sore, but that's the price you pay To have a superpower watching your back, I guess. Anyway, we were pretty sure at least on a few occasions they snagged a few bits for themselves. Back to these things. The second disc, which actually was my first ever, sorry I should have kept them in chronological order for you, had a crew of 5. Only 2 were alive. The strange thing is, we had no idea what killed the other 3. There was only some bruising on their bodies from what we assume was the hard landing, but nothing serious. By the way, the typical gray alien description that people give is pretty close to on the money. Not quite, but very close. They're a little taller than people think, and the eyes aren't quite as big as people draw, but they are big, which tells us they grew up in a low-light environment. All their ships were dimly lit on the inside. I don't know why people who claim to be abducted talk about brightly lit rooms. We never saw any of that. It was dim enough inside these ships to see, but it wasn't comfortable. Maybe these people who say they were abducted are just remembering things wrong. One thing we figured out quickly is they can mess with your head, mess with the way you perceive things. Anyway, the 2 live ones. They weren't injured or anything, just kind of stared at us once the ship opened. The program has strict protocols because we're always expecting to make contact with non-human intelligence, and there are very strict protocols on what to do and what not to do. People think we go after these craft gun blazing in full military gear. I mean, yeah, when I did security for the program, we were heavily armed. We never knew what we were up against or if a foreign team would show up. That happened once or twice. But the security people are on the outside, well away from the craft. Think about it. These things are smart enough to cross the galaxy or come from wherever they come from. Do you really want to show up and send soldiers first? No. We first take readings to ensure there's nothing toxic or hazardous. Then we send in medical personnel. The lead doc we call the ambassador. He had special training for contact protocols in case we ran into something living and talking. The ambassador always spoke at least English, Russian, Chinese, and Spanish, the most prevalent human languages, and I think also things like American Sign Language, though just to be aware of how to speak with body gestures. Not that we expected them to know ASL. So we kept the guys with the guns well back, out of sight if we could. It was a risk. Maybe these things would shoot up the medical team, or maybe there's a space monster in there. But it was a better risk than starting an interstellar war or scaring the hell out of them with armed grunts. That night, the 2 live ones apparently just kind of stood there as the team entered the craft. It had opened on its own. Maybe they opened the door. I don't know if it was open when we got there. They stood there and they didn't answer the ambassador at all. Basically, they just barely reacted to anything. Just basic stimuli like turning their heads away from bright lights. They didn't even object when the medical team started looking them over for injuries, or so I was told. I saw them when they were led out of the craft, and I do mean they were led out like children. The medical guys grabbed them by the hand and just let them out like a kid. They just sort of stood where you left them. I was on Overwatch Squad. We'd spread out along the entrance in a U formation and kept in the tree line, again to provide security if they did anything, but not be visible and intimidating. It was a rule that you never leveled your rifle at these things, even if they were corpses or looked like corpses. Just because they appear dead doesn't mean they are. We don't know much about their physiology, you know. So the last thing you want is for them to feel threatened. I never once leveled my rifle at them or their bodies in all my years on the security side. You always kept the weapon at low ready, muzzle pointed to the ground. People got the wrong idea, and they think we're out there snatching these things up and whisking them away for dissection. Let me tell you, we did everything possible to be helpful. We tried to provide medical treatment, but these things always died. Always. They'd live at most another few days, never said a word or reacting to anything, and then they just slump over. Eventually we figured out that they can take in water based on what we found in the ship, and apparently the food, or whatever you call it, was pretty basic protein and other stuff, I don't know, but nothing fancy. So when we figured it out, we started hooking the live ones up to IVs when we could. They have a circulatory system like us. We figured that out from the corpses, but no matter how hard we tried to keep them alive, they always just keeled over eventually. Back to that night though, the things just stood around wherever we guided them. You led one to stand over there and it'd stand there. You move it somewhere else and it stands there. Their limbs are a little long and their knees aren't in the right places, but they would sit on chairs if one was available. Otherwise, they just stand there until they fell over, exhausted. That and the way their organs worked led us to believe that these things are, well, they're basically just drones, like biological computers. Whatever's making these things just creates a biological crew when it needs one, and they do their job and nothing else. At least that was our theory, because their bodies didn't seem built to last, and the eggheads found it suspicious that they were able to breathe our atmosphere so easily. What are the odds that space aliens would also be able to breathe our exact atmosphere? Plus, we never found anything we'd call personal items on the interiors, ever. There were no drawers full of spare clothing, nothing that looked like it was for entertainment, not even a sleeping area. I don't know if they had to go to the bathroom. Again, a lot of information was compartmentalized, but when I moved to the administrative side of things, you can't stop people from talking. And in truth, the program wanted us to talk, at least those of us who were seniors, because it provided an outlet. You sit on something like this, and you have no one to talk to about it or ponder what this whole thing is, and it eats you up inside. They found that out the hard way in the early days, so they relaxed about how compartmentalized everything was once you'd achieve senior status. Plus, I think they wanted us to share ideas. It's a giant mystery, and people need to share ideas to figure it out. So these things, the aliens, I guess, are probably just biological computers, basically. That's what we thought. But who knows, maybe they're so alien we just don't understand anything about them. But everything seemed to point to that conclusion. And that was suspicious too, because we recovered craft with no crew. So why did the saucers and one or two other types need a crew? We had a theory. Again, I've been out of it for over 20 years, so maybe they know stuff now we didn't back then. But we had a theory in my time that this was all being fabricated for us. We actually tasked NASA to look for where something like a big 3D printer could be in the solar system. Some facility or computer just making these crafts and these things and sending them to Earth. And sometimes they crashed or they just landed and didn't take off. Like whatever was doing this wanted us to recover the craft. I don't know if they ever found anything, though there was some excitement for a while. It's hard to hide heat in space, and obviously making these crafts on such a large scale would give off a lot of heat. Or maybe not. Maybe they use physics we don't even understand. I never felt that these things were a threat. The security teams were really more to keep other people out for whatever was in the craft, but I know that sometimes they defended themselves. The Iranians tried to shoot one down, and it didn't go well for them. We tried too, but it didn't go well for us either. I think we got a little better at it, and I know we did down one or two in the 90s, but only because there was a legitimate concern over what they were doing. They hurt people sometimes. I don't know if it was on purpose or not. I think it was just a side effect of their presence. But there was a lot of good intelligence that you really don't want to be near one when its power systems are fully online. I said earlier that they can mess with your head, and I don't think that's on purpose either. We were confident that the source of the trouble wasn't the living beings we recovered, because you'd get the same effect when the craft was empty if you got close. Not all the time, but sometimes. People would describe things happening in different ways. Never big, major differences, but enough to be worrying. We had to develop special techniques for handling exposure to these crafts. We called them anchors, a consensus on what is reality. For instance, if you and I were on a security team and approached a craft, we'd say, okay, the craft is resting up against a big oak tree, and there's a gray boulder on the other side. You'd think of that picture, and it would help with the confusion whenever that effect happened, kind of ward it off. I don't know what it was though. Maybe a side effect of the technology, maybe some attempt at communication. It didn't seem a defensive measure to me, but yeah, I'm not surprised when there's a sighting and people see different things. As a matter of fact, I know there have been some high-profile events where people have suffered from this phenomenon. The Hopkinsville Goblins, for instance. Those people were shooting at ghosts, but really there was a craft in the vicinity. It's way back when we were first figuring things out though. As far as what they want, I can't tell you. If anyone figured it out, they didn't share it with me. I don't think they're a threat. We only recently got the tech to even harm these things, and even then it seems more like they're letting us do it. We strongly suspected this whole phenomenon was a form of gifting. Why else would craft crash or just land and then nothing comes to try to recover it? If we had a space mission go bad on Mars, we'd send help if we could. I guess Mars is too far away, but okay, the moon. We could rescue people on the moon if we needed to, and we would, but nobody ever comes for these things. And why are they sometimes landing completely operational and not taking off again? Most of us thought that it was a way of gifting technology without massive disruption to our own evolution. I don't know how much they figured out, and I wonder if they ever managed to even fly one of those things. I do know that from speaking to the eggheads, this technology is so far advanced they couldn't tell the difference between the toilet and the drive system. It'd be like giving a nuclear aircraft carrier to the ancient Romans. Maybe they figured it out by now. I don't know. I don't think so. Or we would see some tremendous technology by now. We had another conclusion though, this one more disturbing. Maybe they just left these crafts lying around because they were easy to build, and they just didn't care because they had a plan to deal with us well before we figured out their technology. Imagine if we accidentally lost an F-14 Tomcat to the ancient Romans fully intact while doing reconnaissance. What would we care if they studied it? By the time they figured out how to even turn the damn thing on, we'd already have dealt with them. So maybe we're getting gifted, or perhaps we're getting to be dealt with before we're a problem. I don't know. Only time will tell. Now check out the first 72 hours after aliens make contact hour by hour, or watch I Survived 100 Days of the Invasion, not Minecraft.